Good morning. My name is Pat Lichtman, and I serve on the board here at DuPage Unitarian Universalist Church. My trustee position is spirituality, and so I deal with Sunday services and music, youth RE, and adult enrichment, among a few other things. We want to welcome everyone to our open and inclusive community. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold that there are many spiritual paths to truth and meaning, and we support one another as we each explore these paths. First time and returning visitors, it is our custom to invite you to stand and give your name and where you are from. If you feel comfortable doing so, are there any visitors who would like to introduce themselves? Yes, please. Very good, thank you. Welcome, welcome. Anyone else? Here we go.
I'm Jenny, and this is my husband David. We're visiting from Milwaukee, and we're visiting our mom, Nancy, my mom, who lives in Oswego.
Very good, welcome. Any others? Yes. Okay, very good. Welcome to everyone visiting today. Please join us after the service for coffee hour. We would love to have a chance to get to know you better. I will be there along with many of our members. In addition, our minister, who is not here today, but there are many of others of us that you may speak to, board members will have a special name tag, and please just come up and ask questions. Steve Cooper is here today. He's our DRE, Director of Religious Education, and we welcome everyone. In addition, I would just like to say that for visitors, we have a special place, coffee with our guests. Sometimes the coffee hour can get very crowded and maybe a little intimidating. If you're a first-time visitor, or you've been here more than once and would like a more casual way to connect with a few DuPage UU members, grab a cup of coffee after the service or come as you are and meet us in the lower annex, down the stairs just below the sanctuary on the right, okay? Also today we will have Joys and Concerns. For those of you who are live streaming via YouTube, please be aware that during times of sharing joys and concerns, the live stream will go blank. We'll return after the joys and concerns. Our service can be heard outside the glass doors at the back of the sanctuary, should anyone feel the need to step out of the service for any reason. As we begin our service, please silence all electronic devices. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning. My name is Kat Gelder. I'm the chair of the Sunday Services Committee, and it is my joy and my pleasure to introduce you to Reverend Karen Mooney, who is our service leader this morning. Yes, I'm happy to have you here. A little bit about Karen. Karen works with the Unitarian Universalist Prison Ministries of Illinois as they seek to bring UU faith and worship to people who are incarcerated. She is honored to offer circles of care for those living in prisons and jails and supporting all those affected by incarceration. Karen is a lifelong Unitarian Universalist who learned the art of church from her very involved parents. She has been educated far and wide, working and praying, listening and walking with people. She loves that UU communities are places where you find people who are seeking throughout their entire lives. She has worked as a chaplain, a congregational minister, and a web platform manager. Each one was a joy and difficult for different reasons. Thank you for joining us today, Karen.
We light this chalice we light all chalice this morning for the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
What do we say we want? What do we shout we need? What do we claim to live? This our demand to breathe. We want peace. We want peace for all the people. Peace and justice in our time. You are here today for some reason. You got up, you read the New York Times, or maybe you didn't. You said hello to somebody. You had your bowl of Cheerios, and you made your way into this space with these people today. What do you want? Why are you here? What do you pray for in that silent sanctuary of your heart that might come alive today because you made it into this room? It's about nobody else in this space but you for right now. What do you say we want? We want. What do we shout we need? We need. What do we claim to live? This our demand to breathe. You rise with me as you are willing and able and sing our first hymn. May nothing evil cross the storm.
It is time to gather. Our theme this month is attention and what it means to be a people of attention. The story that I'll be reading to you is Ron's Big Mission by Rosa Blue and Corinne Naden. This is a story about Ron McNair, who grew up to be a space shuttle astronaut. This story is from when he was a child, as he was paying attention to what was happening in the society around him and his courage to make a difference. "You're up early this morning, Ron. What's the rush?" asked Mrs. McNair. "Come and have breakfast. I made some oatmeal." "I have to go, Mama," said Ron, tying his sneakers. "I have something to do this morning." "You always have something to do," said his mother with a smile. "Just be home by lunchtime, okay?" Ron was 9 years old. That morning, he left his house with a plan. He'd been thinking about it for a long time. It was a beautiful South Carolina summer day, and Ron looked up at the blue, blue sky. Someday, he thought, he would be up there, flying a plane. He wanted to be a pilot when he grew up, but today, Ron had something else on his mind, something very important. Ron walked down the street as fast as he could. He didn't want to be late. "Hi, Ron," the grocer called from the front of his store. "There you are, just in time for a donut." "Morning, Mr. Douglas," said Ron. "Thank you, but there's someplace I've got to be." And Ron kept on walking. Down by the schoolyard, Ron saw his friend Carl shooting baskets. "All right, you made it," called Carl. "Hi, Carl," said Ron. "I wish I could stay, but I've got something important to do." "More important than basketball on a summer vacation?" asked Carl. "Are you kidding?" Ron laughed. He loved to play basketball, but not today. Today was too important, and Ron kept on walking. When Ron got to the Lake City Public Library, he stopped. This was it. He was hot from walking so fast, and he was nervous too. He took a deep breath, lifted his head high, and went inside. Mrs. Scott was busy getting ready for all the people who would be using the library today. As the head librarian, she had to make sure that everything was neat and orderly. Mrs. Scott looked up to welcome her first visitor of the day, and she smiled as Ron walked in, her best customer. Ron gave a little wave to Mrs. Scott and went right to the shelves. It took Ron a while to find some books, because he always looked for books that showed children who looked like him. But that was hard. There were not many books about black kids on the shelves. At last, Ron found some books on airplanes, and he took the books and started to walk to the front desk. Ron felt nervous, and his hands felt a little sweaty, but he knew what he wanted to do. Now, Mrs. Fielding, a white lady who was often in the library, stopped him. "You can give me the books, and I'll check them out for you, Ron," she said gently. "No thanks, Mrs. Fielding," Ron said. "I'm going to do it all by myself." "But Ron," she started to say. But Ron was already on his way to the front desk, and he put his books on the counter. "I'd like to check these out, please," said Ron. The desk clerk didn't look at him. Didn't she hear me? Ron knew what he had to do. He jumped up on the counter, and he wanted the desk clerk to know that he was serious. "I'd like to check out these books," he said quietly. At first, the desk clerk and Mrs. Scott just looked at each other. "You can't check out books, Ron," said Mrs. Scott. "You can read them here. That's the rule. Only white people can check out books from the library." Ron looked at Mrs. Scott and the desk clerk politely, but he would not budge. "I always read them here. Today, I want to check them out," said Ron. Mrs. Scott and the desk clerk did not know what to do. Ron would not get off the counter. People were staring. Finally, the desk clerk called the Lake City Police. 2 policemen came right over. "Let someone else check out the books for you, son," said one of the policemen. "You know the rules." But Ron just shook his head. He would not budge. Now, Mrs. Scott called Ron's mother, and Mrs. McNair came to the library very quickly. "I know how you feel, baby," she said, "but you have to follow the rules." "I can't, Mama," Ron told her. "It's wrong. The rules are not fair. Why can't I check out books like everyone else?" No one said anything. Not the desk clerk, not Mrs. Scott, not the policeman, not even Ron's mother. Mrs. Scott looked at Ron, and she thought about all the times that Ron came into the library and all the times he sat at the tables for hours looking over so many books. He was her best customer, and she knew what she had to do. Mrs. Scott walked back into her office and started writing. And Ron wondered what she was doing. And Mrs. Scott returned and handed Ron a library card. His library card. Ron looked at Mrs. Scott and smiled. As he jumped to the floor, he thought he saw her smile too. "I'd like to check these books out, please," he said, handing the card to the desk clerk. The desk clerk took the library card and stamped the cards in the back of the books. "These are due back in 2 weeks," she said. Ron smiled. "Thank you," he said, and he tucked the books under his arm and took his mother's hand, and together they walked home. Ron couldn't wait to get to his room and open to page 1. So the boy who was Ron McNair grew into a man who flew planes just like he dreamed he would do. He became an astronaut. Today, everyone in Lake City remembers him. They remember him every time they walk into the library. The red brick building on 234 Main Street is a special place. The walls in the children's room were painted with pictures that show children reading books under a huge oak tree, and a space shuttle flies through the sky. Inside the library, anyone can get a card and check out books. Young Ron McNair had a dream, and on that day in 1959, he made it start to come true. Because of him, many young people have a chance to dream. McNair once told a group of children, "You can only be a winner if you're willing to walk over the edge. You are eagles. Spread your wings and fly to the sky." Many years ago in Lake City, South Carolina, young Ron McNair became a hero. Years later, in 1986, astronaut Ron McNair was once again a hero. He lost his life when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded on January 28th. With the loss of the entire crew, the Lake City Public Library is dedicated to astronaut McNair. This is a fictionalized story around a real incident in Ron McNair's life. There are several versions of this story, but this version comes from interviews with Ron's mother and the people at the library that day. Please stand in body or spirit and join us in singing hymn number 118, "This Little Light of Mine." The children and youth will depart with me after the first verse to go to religious education classes. The words will be projected.
Before we begin Joys and Concerns, I would like to pause for a few minutes in remembrance of Veterans Day, which is tomorrow. Today, we have set aside time to publicly say thank you to our siblings who have served in the Air Force, Army, Coast Guard, Navy, and Marines. To say thank you to all who served, whatever their role, wherever their service took them. We say thank you to those whose service was brief and to those who made a career of their service. We say thank you to those who remember their service with fondness and to those whose time in service still haunts them. We say thank you to those who returned to us largely whole, who found jobs, started families, and who continue to find ways to serve their communities. We say thank you to veterans who returned conflicted so deeply that they continue to struggle to find a role or even a home in our communities. God of many names, source of love, in the face of all of this, in every time. Sometimes the only prayer that we have to offer is thank you. We hope and pray it will be enough. This is the time during our service that we attend to the joys and concerns that some of you carry in your hearts. We affirm that as a community, we share in your sorrows and rejoice in your happiness. When you come forward, please state your name to the microphone right here and share one or two sentences about a joy or concern in your personal life that we may walk with you in the days to come. And you are now invited to come forward to share your joy or concern with your beloved community.
Hello. My name is Leanne. I have a long time when I was growing up for many years.
These times call for more than safety. They call for bravery, for brave space. The bravery of those who have never needed to be brave is what will finally force change. Those of us who benefit from privilege must use our voices, our bodies, to demand change. We must be brave enough to disobey laws that are unjust, brave enough to listen and speak, brave enough to follow those who have been crushed as they now lead. To end marginalization and inequality, we must be courageous enough to question the laws and traditions that created disparity in education, in housing, and in wages. Only when we take courage and act to force that change will there finally be justice for those who have been other, for those who have all these years stood outside the circle of power. Let us no longer be content with safety. Let us ask for more than sanctuary or refuge. To reach peace and justice, let us be brave.
What do we say we want? What do we shout we need? What do we claim to live? Justice. Our churches and communities like this have struggled for years to try to figure out this balance point between, are we safe havens for people in need, realizing that that need is real? Are we safe havens, or are we places where we can encourage one another to become our best selves? Encourage through sometimes disorienting and challenging places to say, oh, I can let go of the Karen that was there a week ago, a day ago, 20 minutes ago, and be something new. Are we here as sanctuaries? Of course we are. There are people among you right now, there might be pieces among you right now that are in deep need of a place that is safe, that can be found and real, where you can find your wholeness again. But aren't there also those places that are yearning, maybe a little afraid, to stretch into something that is larger, something that is more whole, something that is not just safe, but is brave? This term safe space, our need for safe space, came out of this, the 1970s when the LGBTQ community, then just the LGBT community, said, you know what, we need a space where we can meet because our lives are literally threatened on a daily basis. People are bashing us, they're killing people who look like us, and we need to meet together to be able to say, oh, this is hard, this is ugly, how did you make it? How did you go and shop at that store? How? How do I keep on breathing and saying what I want and what I need to be able to move forward into the next day? And so they created spaces where only they would go in and they would talk about, how does this work? Amazingly enough, that idea of safe space was so powerful. It resonated so much with people that we took it out into the world, and people began claiming the need for safe space in a lot of different areas. The challenge is that if you ask for safe space, which is sometimes needed, But if you ask for safe space when you don't need it, what happens is you become really comfortable, but you don't necessarily grow into the people that you say that you want to be. Brave space is this place where we agree to take on new ideas. Don't ask me to think something new. We take on risks. We take courage to step forward into the world that we see. We know that it's not going to be a place of perfection. Oh my gosh, let go of that. Instead, we take on the very real work of saying, in order for the world to be perfect, in order for that justice that came forward out of this community, in order for that to be real, I'm going to set aside my need for perfection and instead take up my desire to be brave and courageous and step into those places of the world where I see there is still a need for change. Holy cow, is there a need for change? Does anybody think there's a need for change? Maybe someplace in the United States, perhaps on the East Coast, I don't know. Just saying, maybe. And that could be anywhere. That sounds so easy coming from the pulpit, right? I'm going to be brave. I'm going to read a kid's story about somebody who's brave. I'm going to take on courage, and I'm going to be brave. But in reality, being brave means being uncomfortable. It means learning what provokes fear in you. It means testing those limits of the ideas that you have, the concepts that we live with, the places that we feel really secure, to figure out what's a real fear and what's just an illusion. It takes strengthening our listening and following muscles so that we can hear what somebody else is saying. We can hear what someone else is saying. Not just sit there politely listening as we pretend like that's going to fit into this very well-ordered life that I have. Oh, that goes on floor 2, right next to the Cheerios are good for you in the morning. I like Cheerios, apparently. You know, this thing of being brave, I actually have come to believe that this is our call as a liberal, progressive, religious faith in this world today. It is our call to say that what was a moment ago is not good enough until there is justice for all, which may never happen. It certainly probably won't happen in my lifetime. Maybe it will in yours, but we will only get there if we take the chance of ourselves being uncomfortable. So, as most of you know or heard, if you were here at the beginning of the service, I work with the UU Prison Ministries of Illinois. We engage people who are locked up in Illinois and people who want to help them. I started this work about 3 years ago. And the very first ministerial request that I got when I took the job was to go and marry 2 people, same-sex couple, in a place called Rushville Detention Center. And I was sort of like, yeah, I chose the right job. Awesome! I get to marry 2 people, same-sex couple, in a prison. This is great. I was going to listen to their stories and bear witness to their suffering. I was going to affirm the humanity of those people like our first principal had called us to do. I was going to let them know you are not forgotten. And then I found out Rushville is a detention center for people who are committing or have committed or have at least have been convicted of sexually violent crimes. They've served their sentences, but they're put into a detention center for treatment. It took me 6 weeks to answer that first letter. As I wrestled with what does it mean to marry people who've profoundly hurt others in personal and sometimes incurable ways. My family has a history. I have a history. Like so many people who stepped forward in the Me Too movement, I have a story to tell about sexual violence, and this weighed on me. I grappled with this truth. I wanted to help people. I wanted justice. I wanted to be able to sing about it and make it be meaningful. But apparently I wanted to help the mother who was stealing milk for her baby. Or I wanted to help the person who was charged with murder, this is real, was charged with murder on accountability charges because their car was used for the murder. I wanted to help somebody who had battered maybe, but they battered out of self-defense. How could I help someone that was convicted of sexually violent crimes? After some time, I found my clarity. You see, I've come to believe that crime, any crime, whether it's something that's been committed and somebody is sitting in prison for it, or something that has been committed and no one has ever even acknowledged it. Crime is an abuse of power. It is domination, it is controlling circumstances. Crime happens likely every day within our world, and sometimes we are the criminals. The type of crime committed does not make that person less human. It just means that they came to an edge that they weren't able to find their way beyond. And if I was going to believe that first principle that we heard today, the worth and dignity of all people, I had reckoning to do with myself. I finally got there. 6 weeks later, I answered that letter. And still, it took me 2 months to actually get down to Rushville. There were all kinds of excuses, and some of these are really good, right? It's a 4-hour drive to Rushville one way. Hard to put that into my 10-hour work week. I needed buy-in from people. Does everybody agree that this is the work that we should be doing, right? Amazingly enough, when I asked the people that I worked for that, they would simply say, yes, Karen, this is why we hired you. That. I was still struggling. I was still struggling because every time I took a step towards what I thought I knew about the world that I lived with, I found a criminal justice system that was supposed to make our society safe and keep all of us secure, but didn't do that and was actually torturing people. Oh. Our prison industrial complex is a bit of an illusion. It's an illusion that we live with comfortably because we don't see it very often. The jails are in parts of the city that we don't visit unless you're, have one of those letters that come from the state and say you've got to serve on a jury. The prisons are even farther flung, often places that nobody ever goes to, and that's intentional. They separate people from communities of care. It's a road going from a place where you are arrested, convicted of a crime, and then sent away from people who might help you in a time when you are at your deepest need of a community to remind you that you are human and part of this circle of life and being. I was struggling. I was struggling because everything about the system went against what I had learned as a kid about officer friendly. It went against what I had learned as a young adult about how things worked. If I was going to get caught up, mostly I was going to get let go. Malice is really inherent in the system. Not always, I want to say that, not always, but often. We were at Logan yesterday, and every time I walk in, I'm reminded of a young woman who was there who was a cutter, so cutting themselves in order to feel enough to be able to remind themselves that they exist here and that they are solidly human. And a CO, a correctional officer, apparently at one point told them that they should try harder next time. It's a system where you know that everybody that you encounter is likely to spend some time in solitary confinement. In some way, I have internalized this to believe that it is a way to help to break those people into the obedient offenders that we are encouraged to call the people that we visit. Rushville is a detention center. It's not a prison. But it sure looks like one. Concertina wire, 12-foot double fences, they have solitary. The inmates there receive rehabilitation. But here's the really goofy thing. There is no set of rules around how they get released. So they get out of prison within 48 hours, they're taken to Rushville, and then in order to, for many of them, in order for them to get in front of a judge, they have to be in therapy, but the therapist has to say whether or not they think that they are ready to go before a judge. And for some people, that judge is going to be in a county where they will never let anybody who's been convicted of a sexually violent crime go. So essentially, we've given people a life sentence, but they have no habeas corpus. No one sees them, no one remembers them, and I can hear it, right? Well, these are the worst of the worst. Who cares about them? Indeed, no one. The only positive difference that I have been able to see at Rushville is that they can get a 60-pound box of food and gifts if, and this is a huge if there is anyone on the outside that remembers them. I found myself 2 months afterwards driving to talk to two people who, once they get married, will be able to kiss in that ceremony and never touch one another again while they're at Rushville. It seems that every day offered these opportunities to just go, whoa. And I ask myself, what keeps me going? You might ask that too, right now. And what I have to say is the people like M, who I meet at Rushville. First paragraph of the couple that I married in 2016, he said, I am here, I am human, and I will be seen and I will be given the rights that I have as a human being within this system to love who I'll love, to let them know that I love them, and to let everybody within this system know that we have found each other against impossible odds. Much like our real-life hero in the story this morning, Ron, M's courage allowed me to learn. He allowed me to test my limits from where I knew I was safe to being able to be brave in the face of all that I was learning. He won that right, not just for himself, but for, oh gosh, I think I'm marrying my 6th couple sometime in December. It's because of M that I was able to see the true reality, able to walk through my limp-wristed, no, that's not good. Walk through my shattered and fragile and lightweight view of our first principle. I believe everybody has worth and dignity. Look at me. I can say it out loud, all those words. They're great. They're great. But do they hold the weight of your life? I can do this work because of the brave space that was opened up for me by someone else. And this is the reality of where we are. Whether today you've come in and you know that you need safety, or you've come in and you're willing to say, okay, challenge me a little bit, Karen. I'll take it. I'll be a little brave. No matter where you are, you need the other people in this room to be with you. It's not enough to be alone in a space of need, whether that's a space for safety or a space for courage. We know this in part because in order to stand up against something, oftentimes we need something like a true partner to stand with us. There was this guy, Solomon Asch. He was a psychologist, and he came up with something known as the Asch paradigm. The Asch paradigm is this thought that in order for us to be our best selves, or in order for us, I don't think he would use that language, but in order for us to say the truth, oftentimes we need somebody that would stand with us in front of a crowd. He did this really interesting experiment. He took lengths of line and said, tell me which one is longer. Which one is longer? Longer? Longer. Anyone? Longer? Longer. If you had everybody else in the room who said longer, shorter, longer, shorter, amazingly enough, 65% of you would say, okay, whatever, longer, shorter. I guess here in the Unitarian Church we don't know how to make measurements, but that's fine. I'm with you. Because of our need to be with and part of something, we will put what we know is right aside sometimes in favor of belonging. But he also found this out. If he had just one person who was willing to say, that's wrong, shorter, longer, no, I get it, they're all saying longer, shorter, longer, that person able to stand. We are hardwired to find our place, and we are also hardwired to be able to stand with someone who is a true partner of ours, to be able to say, longer, shorter, you are wrong. You are not telling the truth. There is truth in this world. We remember that. I was able to stand with M because he stood up first, because he took the courage to create a brave space in his place, and because of that, I was able to step into the work that I had said that I wanted to do. What can we take from these lessons into our lives? This is a community of free thinkers. I'm sure that many of you feel like, no, 65%. Totally here would have been like 10, 5%, maybe. None of us would have. Shorter, longer, short. No. Right? We are used to being the heretics, gosh darn it. How do we create brave spaces even in this place, where you have come and maybe brought identities with you that are not safe anywhere else? Where you have come and you have asked for the greatest gift that you might ever ask for. See me as somebody who is still worthy of growing and still worthy of transforming this world and this heart that lives within me. We have to create brave spaces. I'm sure that I am not the only one that watches television or reads the news these days. There are affronts to truth and decency that are out there right now. There are affronts. And we have the right to fight for our democracy just as surely as the veterans that gave their lives. People on the margins, though, I want us to remember this, will be more directly affected. We need to practice being brave. We need to practice being brave so that when somebody stands up, if nothing else, we can stand with them. We can stand with people who are standing against transphobia, against racism, against all of the isms that are in our lives, and there are a lot of them right now. How many people like right now pointing at, I don't know, in the Unitarian Universalist world, at the old white men? It's an easy target right now. What if someone stood and said, no, even old white men have a place here in the circle. They have a wisdom that we have a need to listen to, not over and above, but with. I know that this community has done this work of creating brave space before. You wouldn't be written up in the UU World for the Smile Project if you hadn't. You wouldn't be a welcoming congregation if you hadn't. You wouldn't have built this sanctuary if you hadn't had spaces where people could come and say, I just want to be brave today, and say an unpopular truth to those people who might listen to me. Fabulous. Let's do it again. Right? The thing is it's never, ever, ever done. The minute that you think that you've found your feet and have courage is the minute that you start walking to the next point on the line. Don't we stop to wonder if in our places where we are comfortably progressive, where we're not just telling ourselves a story about being brave instead of acting brave? Maybe you use herbicides on your garden. Ooh. Roundup? Don't say that word. Maybe you have a close relationship with God. Maybe you have started talking to people about the impact of your words rather than just the intent of them. Brave space is wrestling with the assumptions of lifetimes. It is being uncomfortable. It is learning what provokes fear in us so we can tell the difference between fear and illusion. It is testing our ideas, and it is strengthening our listening and following muscles. It takes courage. It takes real courage to see the world as it is rather than the comfortable place that we would like to believe we inhabit. And communities like this have the opportunity to be messy places where we actually bring who we are through the door rather than who someone thinks we should be. Struggling with alcoholism, food addiction, struggling because your job is on the line, struggling every day to go into work knowing that maybe your business is going to fail. What if we brought those things through the door as well and created a brave space where we could hear one another And in hearing and practicing being brave, we might actually make a safe space for people who need it in this world because they live on an edge that many of us will never know. We practice brave space precisely because it is through risk-taking and opening and disorienting and reorienting that we can find new solid ground upon which to stand and stand firmly in the face of life, our lives, but also in the lives of others that we might welcome here. When we create brave space, that, my friends, is when we can truly be welcoming. When we can hear the first principle and know that we have lived it, they are not simply words, but that we truly believe in the worth and dignity of all people. This community is in the midst of change. You've been here for a while now. I remember in January standing up and saying, "Oh, wow, cow for peace." I wonder what love looks like here and now. What uncomfortable truths you hold and who you can speak them to. How do you create brave space here so that you can be the community that you know you are called to be? Where do you go? How do you engage each other? Remembering that the simplest step is likely to open you up to discomfort and growth. Learning more about justice work is what I have found is a great starting space. Not because the justice work is the place that it stops, but because it's a fabulous place to start. As you look and hear about people who are working in Cook County Jail like Robert Scrocki or Ann Hahn-Bayer, as you hear about people that are going and working with the Smile Project, as you hear about people who are fighting for women's rights to choose, hear about all the other work that is going on in this community. What that work does is it brings you a huge gift. I'm a huge proponent of saying that the justice work that we do, it's great if it helps somebody else, and I really hope that that's true, but we need to be honest, and oftentimes we're doing it because it's what we need. We do this work because it opens us up to the realities of who we are. So, Pen Pal might be a good place to start. Doesn't ask you to leave your home. But don't be surprised if questions don't start coming in. Well, what do I tell them about myself? Do I use my real name? What about my address? How do I know? What if I find out that their offense was really something I can't deal with? How do I grapple with my first principle? If we learn, if we put ourselves in the way of learning, we can take that first principle and walk with it wherever we go in life. Not because we know it's going to stay the same, but precisely because we know that it will change and grow us every time we come up against it and say, I choose brave space. I choose courage. It's not going to make you popular or celebrated or even recognized, but choosing brave space allows us to live with integrity and compassion that we aspire to achieve. Changing the world, my friends, changing the world is a lofty goal, and it is possible by changing ourselves and changing who and how we relate to the world that we live within. Let us no longer be content with asking for only safe space. let us ask for brave space, where we can make safe space for others. What do we say we want? What do we shout we need? This our demand to live. How do we breathe? If you want peace, work for justice. If you want peace, work for justice. And if you want peace, ask yourself, how am I being brave today? We transition now into a time of offering for the work of this community. The work of your hands through an offering is made real. It is the time when you can celebrate specifically this community. Today, the loose change that you have and any checks that are made out to the Unitarian Universalist Prison Ministry of Illinois, checks made out to DuPage Unitarian Universalist with UUPMI in the memo line will go to the organization Unitarian Universalist Prison Ministry of Illinois. We are hopefully brave organization that is trying to give people in Illinois, people like yourselves, an opportunity to grapple with what it means to live with justice in our world. Thank you.
Time moves swiftly on, even without us, but we would love to sing just the first two verses of Building a New Way, hymn number 1017. Please rise as you are willing and able in body and spirit and join us.
always take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path never clear, never. The stakes very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone. Go into this world, take your bravery, stand up as true partners, and be the people that you know that you have been longing for all of your lives. What do we say we want? We want, what do we shout? We need, this our demand to live, this your demand to breathe. Peace.